All right, welcome to episode number 52 of the Songwriter's Couch, presented by the Patrick Joen Band. Now, before we get started, don't forget to go down, like, subscribe, leave some comments, that sort of thing, too. It helps the algorithms get into alignment as well. Don't forget to visit patrickjoen.com and grab some of our merch, our band merch. It really does help the channel and us here at the Songwriter's Couch. And then if you happen to come to a show and you see these on the table, these are something special. There is special content on there that you cannot get anywhere else. Special Patrick Joen Band stuff on there, and the only place you can get it is one of our shows. So hope to see you guys there. And on today's show, I have one of my favorite guests that I've been longing to speak to, which we always cross paths. However, we never get a long, extended period of time to talk because usually one or both of us is performing something somewhere, or I'm running an open mic or what have you. On today's show, the one, the only Mr. Murray Thomas. Welcome to the show, Murray.
Thank you. Yes.
Why don't you take a moment and tell the people that are watching and listening and all that kind of what you do, and then maybe where they can find your wares and what you're peddling over there?
Okay. I'm a writer. Primarily write poetry, or at least in the past, primarily wrote poetry. But my latest book, which I'll fish out of the bag here, is a memoir. It's called Living the Sundown, and it's about taking care of my parents who both had dementia. It's a pretty heavy read, but people seem to like it.
My grandmother had Alzheimer's as well, so it was.
Yeah.
I know the struggle of it. I guess probably not as closely as you do, and it's
a very common thing, especially for people our age range, which is a bit, but still, but. So many people I talked to said, "Oh yeah, my mom, my grandma, it's happening more and more."
So where can they find if someone's going to purchase it?
If you going to purchase it, actually the best thing to do is to go through Amazon.
Oh, excellent!
You'll get it. You could order it through my publisher, who is Moontide Publishing, but you'll get it a lot quicker if you order through Amazon, because my publisher personally has to package it up in an envelope and send it to you if you order it through him.
Yep, fair enough. Fair enough. And we'll post the link to the Amazon Amazon link too. So
yeah, if you want to find out more about me, the website is gmurraythomas.com. That's GMurrayThomas. But if that's too much to remember, GMT Poet takes you to the exact same webpage.
Beautiful. Look at Murray one-upping me, because I'm still, so someone has tpjb.com, and I'm looking to purchase it, but I'm thinking I'm going to get ripped off if I try and purchase it now. So I'm going to let it calm down, and I'm not going to search for it or anything.
Yeah.
And then hopefully at some point I'll go and I'll check, and it'll be available, because I think my last name is pretty much impossible for most people to to spell. So I realized that. But welcome to the show, Murray. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me.
I feel kind of like we're kindred spirits in a way, because my musical endeavors kind of started with poetry and writing back in the beginning, before I knew how to play any instruments or anything like that. And before we get into the weeds, though, we're going to do this little bit that I like to do as a kind of an icebreaker, right? Called Two Truths and a Lie. So you ready to do it?
I think so. Let
Okay.
me see what I can come up with here.
All right. Well, let's get to it.
Okay. When I was in high school, I spent 10 days in the hospital with a head injury.
Ooh.
Over the course of like the past 6 or 7 years, I have spent a total of 4 times in the hospital, 3 or 4 days each, with UTIs.
Oh, geez.
And
we're getting real personal.
Yeah, we are getting real here.
I like it.
And let me see, what's the third one? Well, I was once blind in both eyes with detached retinas.
Wow. All right, so detached retinas, UTIs. That's right. And I'm sorry. The first one was
Head injury.
head injury. When you were how old?
17, I think.
Give or take. Okay.
Or no,
I
15.
remember because of the
Right.
Yeah,
That's
right.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go with the head injury simply because it was the first one you said, and I feel like when you're coming up with a lie, Allie, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You want to get it out quickly. What do you think?
retina.
You're going retina, so legally blind for a week. And funny story. So my grandfather once, and there's a line in one of my songs called "Speed." Right?
Yeah.
He would tell me this. He told me this story that once when he was a kid, him and I think his brother and one of the neighborhood kids had a contest to see who could stare at the sun the
Oh,
longest,
jeez.
and he won, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And was blind for a couple of weeks from staring for so long
Wow.
directly at the sun. So one of the lines in my song "Speed" is paying homage to my grandfather doing that. It's kind of like the Icarus
Yeah.
thing, you won, but was it worth the
Yeah.
the flight towards the sun? So I'll give you a little drum roll and then you let us know
Okay.
which one was the lie, Murray.
The lie is I cheated. The lie is that any of those didn't happen to me.
Oh.
All three of those
Double
happened
cross, Murray. Crisscross. So none of them were true. None of them.
No,
or none
all
of them
were true.
Oh, all of them were true.
were true.
Crisscross. Geez, so lots of hospital stuff. So if I may, the retinas, both retinas.
Yep.
So how did that happen? It was just
Well, I have my suspicions. Of course, I can't prove it, but I had cataract surgery in both eyes 3 months prior.
and so maybe they
So
screwed something up.
Suspicious coincidence.
Yeah. Did you have to actually have surgery to get it
Yes.
like fixed again?
Yeah, they had to go in with a.
Interesting.
Well, this is a good story. I had to go in with a laser. They were like 2 weeks apart, but they go in with a laser and reattach your retina. And then pump your eye full of gas to hold the retina in place.
Are you awake during
the
this?
fluid that's normally in your eye isn't strong enough to
keep it.
keep
Yeah.
it. So, and that's why you go blind is you can't. I mean, it's like really hazy. It's like being underwater. So they did this to both of my eyes. And then we go to the doctor to say, well, what do we do here? And he said, well, there's this possible surgery where in one of your eyes we replace the gas with saline. And that you can at least see through. So, let's go for that because I'm like,
And now
not digging this being blind to both eyes. Well, when the day he did the surgery, he literally said, I've never done this before, but it should work.
that's not a reassuring sentence
but
you want to hear
work. It did work. I was able.
from your doctor. Yeah, Allie's unfortunately because of her autoimmune disease has been through a lot of struggles, and you get to know that doctors. I mean, I have a few doctors in my family, so I kind of know that because I know my family members and that they're not perfect and all knowing.
Yeah.
But you get to know over the course of if you have some kind of illness or things that that are a lot that doctors are kind of sometimes just guessing and duct taping and MacGyvering some stuff. So
the follow up to that is that I've actually had 3 different doctors tell me about 3 different conditions. I've never seen anything like this before in my life.
Maybe you and Allie are brother and sister somehow because she's gotten a lot of those kind of diagnoses as well.
What's going on here? Yeah.
So all right. So do you want to get into the other medical things, or should we get into the meat and potatoes here?
Well, I think we should.
Let's get.
There's the medical thing, which is very relevant, which is I'm a kidney transplant patient.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how did Was the when you get a kidney transplant, is the person alive?
The one who gave
donating
me
it?
a kidney is. She was an altruistic donor. She was a total stranger, but
Is there a list you can get on to just be a donor like that? Like you can just stay on that list, like, hey, if anyone needs it, sort of thing?
I believe there is now, because what it was, how it worked out is my sister was not a compatible donor. And when at first she's like, no, I don't want to do that. But eventually she decided, watching me be on dialysis for 7 years, she was like, yeah, maybe I can help them out. But since she couldn't donate directly to me, they were just starting to do chain transplants. So she agreed to give a kidney to someone else. And in return, I got a kidney from this woman who just came forward and said, and she had medical connections. So she was, and I have actually met her. I met her like a year and a half after the transplant. And then when I was on tour, I went and stayed with her for a night.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Did you drink your kidneys, both the kidneys, enough to get it? Do the kidneys have anything with alcohol metabolism?
No, it's not good for them, but yeah.
That's right. Oh, so that's amazing. So and I do want to get into the tour because I think that was really cool what you did with your book there, and going on tour. What was that? Your first book tour?
Yes, my first. Well, actually, no. I'd done a couple of tours with a buddy of mine in California, just like around the mountain states. Like we went to Arizona and Colorado and New Mexico and did a few readings. Nothing as extensive as this one. Yeah,
that was, and you did that. You drove yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you had a companion with you
for that one,
I believe during this most recent one, right?
No, I did not have.
Oh, you did. So you were solo.
This one
for
totally
that.
Solo.
Wow, wow. Okay, so I want to get into some of that tour too. But what got you into writing? And before we started the podcast, I kind of talked about some writers because that's how I got started. I started writing poetry before I could play an instrument or anything like that. You know, my father was a musician, my brother was a musician, but I always wanted to sing, and I always wanted to more so than singing and the instrument, which is probably why I'm not as a virtuoso instrumentalist as I should be, is because I don't, it's not necessarily the writing and the music part of it. It's more the storytelling and the writing part of it that I think is my draw to writing music and songwriting. So what got you into poetry and writing as opposed to something like music where, you know?
Before I even knew how to write, I would dictate stories to my mother and she would write them down. So that was the start.
Yeah.
And as soon as I, was able to write on my own, I wrote a lot of short stories, but also I wrote poetry, and I was like 5th grade, I was writing god-awful rhyming poetry. I didn't even want to think about it. But,
was it how did you get exposed to poetry? Was it just something like
school? I don't know if they even do this nowadays, but they had us write poetry in English class. You know. And,
did you have? So I remember, and the reason again why I brought that up before is because I remember reading Jim Carroll from Basketball Diaries and William Burroughs and Kerouac, and then I started getting into the weird psychedelic stuff like Carlos Castaneda and those books, right? And I remember reading and really enjoying when you're reading the words on the page, the imagery that comes up in your head as you're doing it, and really being in love with that feeling and wanting to do that. And express myself in a way that someone else could see what my thoughts were. Was there like a particular writer or a particular piece you remember reading maybe that was like, I want to do that?
Jim Morrison.
I got you. Yeah. That was one of mine too.
Because I went through a period of really serious writing poetry, even though still no good. But when I was in high school, I would late at night just bang away on a typewriter and crank out so I was so prolific then. But Morrison and other rock musicians, John Lennon, and this is even before Jim Carroll or Patti Smith, but just listening to rock lyrics inspired me to write poetry.
It also is really interesting that rock musicians back then were kind of allowed to be a poet too.
Yeah.
Like if you look at musicians now are there any poet / pop stars right now?
Not pop
like you don't
stars.
see like Sabrina Carpenter and Taylor. I mean, maybe Taylor Swift will come out with like
I'm
a
sure
poetry
Taylor
book.
Swift has notebooks full of poetry somewhere.
But I feel like, especially in that era, there was this idea of like it's all art form, it's all expression. So it was okay to be like I don't think people were going to be musicians. Well, probably some of them. Hey, I'm going to be a big, rich, musician or whatever. I think a lot of it was just this desire and need to express themselves as artists in whatever facet or whatever way.
Well, there's a very influential book on me from back then called The Poetry of Rock. Huh. And it was, I think Goldstein was his name, even though I may be wrong on that, but who analyzed popular rock lyrics as poetry, like Beatles songs and Mamas and Papas and The Doors, of course, and stuff like that. And it really inspired me to try to do, to write poetry in those forms. And Richard Gold, okay, I do remember.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Were you into any like the Beat poets and that? I also remember watching the round table about Dorothy Parker. Wow. And that table, that group of writers and how they hated Kerouac and all the beat writers because they're like, oh, it's garbage. They're not doing the, they don't have it formatted in the, the correct grammar, whatever. It's just nonsense they're writing. It doesn't take any talent. But I forget what the question was.
I didn't really get introduced to the beats until I was in college. And part of how I did was that, like the year before I went there, Hampshire College, which is where I went, a place called Hampshire College, they had a beat forum at which like Ginsberg and I don't know if Ferlinghetti was there, but Peter Orlovsky, who was Ginsberg's lover, and Gregory Corso and a number of the beats came, and I especially remember watching a video of Ginsberg reading and Corso is heckling him mercilessly all the way through his reading. And I liked that. That got me inspired.
Yeah.
And so
there was sort of a rock star thing going on with those poets in particular. I remember I like sharing stories with you, Murray, because I feel, again, like we're kind of kindred spirits here. But I remember doing a poetry reading in my high school, and my best friend John at the time, we had written a piece together called Break the Breakers, something like that. And we had planted a few people in the audience to be chanting, like, break the breaker, whispering kind of in the back, and like, okay, get louder and louder as the poem goes on. But it was a school reading, and I don't think they were prepared for that, because people in the audience started being like, shh, they're like getting offended and telling them to be quiet during but I remember approaching it in that way because I felt the same way about the beat poets and just art in general, that it should be something that's a freedom to be kind of crazy. If that
definitely
makes sense. Like not crazy, but free, like a literal free expression of what you're, what you're feeling. Like an example, I had a musician on here that in her latest music videos or whatever, she would wear this helmet thing, and I was like, it's so much fun as an adult to be an artist or a musician or a writer, because you get to play pretend on stage. And people just think, he's just an artist. Yeah. If you just do that in the middle of the street, people might be like, what is this person doing? Yeah. But we get to be like children, almost, like the freedom of a child, through our art form. So, and I admire that about you too, that, neither of us are young bucks at this point in time, but like that you're continuing to do it and put out books and doing things like tours, which is quite frankly amazing that you're doing that now. Your first tour. I don't want to ask your age. I never ask a beautiful lady her age.
I'm on Social Security and getting Medicare. So
there you go, perfect. So when was your first real? Like, did you go to an open mic and read something?
Yeah, they. I don't think I did much of that in high school, but when I was I took a gap year in college. I went to college for a year and things weren't working out, and so I took a year off. Came back to Rochester, and there was a poetry thing going on, and so I started going to their open readings and reading in those, and that was like my first experience doing that. And then I kind of dropped out of it, and I didn't really get back into reading until I moved to Southern California some 10 years, 15 years later. But then I found, very quickly found poetry readings and found a very lively poetry scene going on.
Yeah, in Rochester, you're saying?
No, this is in L.A.
So you were in L.A.
I was in L.A.,
yeah. I feel like back in the day, L.A. was definitely a kind of a destination, or at least the West Coast was for East Coast people. I remember, and probably because of On the Road, that trip I remember in high school was always both mine and a lot of my friends. I want to drive across the country.
Wow.
I want to make that drive. I want to, go lay on the beach at the end of it in California and LA, drive back and do that whole on the road thing that Kerouac did, So I'm assuming there was a lot of poets and musicians and stuff that were in LA, which
there were. And I didn't, at that point I was writing fiction. I didn't consider myself a poet, but I first moved to Laguna Beach, and there was a weekly poetry reading, and I started going to it just to meet other writers. But very quickly, I'm like, I want to get up there and read some of my stuff. And so what I did is I started taking paragraphs out of this novel I wrote and chopping them up and calling them poems.
It's interesting.
And that's how I got started, and then eventually I shoved the novel in a drawer and kept doing poetry.
Did you find so I've done, I don't want to say a novel. I wrote a short story called Drink California Milk, and it's on Apple, whatever their books thing is, and somewhere else. And then what is it called? iBooks or something. No, that's something different. So Drink California Milk is almost, I thought of it as a novel, but it was only ended up being like 100 something pages, 120. So it's like not long enough to be really a novel. So I think of it like a short story, but within that were these like prose, just rantings. And then it would go back to the story. It was really disjointed. And actually after I got divorced, I ended up going back in and re-editing that a lot. Surprisingly, made it more readable. But I did the same as you, where I ended up doing more poetry with, again, my friend John, and we released a book. But what drew you to the poetry side versus the novel fiction?
I've been working on the novel for 7 years, and I wasn't anywhere near done, and I could finish a poem. That's seriously I could finish a poem.
I was going to say that was my downfall. Again, it was, 100 pages was like, oh my God, I got 100 pages out of this and whatever, but it was never going to be I was never going to be the next great novel writer,
Yeah. Well, I did. I took it. I got a first draft done, took it to a workshop, and they made it obvious that I had to go back to page 1 and start again. And I wasn't up for that, I
think the editing on a novel, right, it's so daunting. Yeah. It's like you have to think about the whole story all the way through. Yeah. And like edit and make sure everything like is cohesive and works. It's an enormous amount of work. So when was the first, I guess, poetry book that you actually ended up publishing? Because I'm sure publishing poetry in general, it's not like a super sought after thing from publishers because they're not typically bestsellers. It's very few and far between. The
first my first book was a chapbook. It was like 20 pages long that my buddy published for me.
So explain what is a chapbook for
A
people.
chapbook
that
is a
don't know.
really short book. I mean, if
Usually-
it's under, well, it's kind of
like self-publishing,
yeah, but it's
so to speak.
I mean, in my mind, a chapbook is like 30 pages or under, even though nowadays publishers are putting out like 50, 60 pages and still calling them chapbooks. I guess the other distinction in my mind is a chapbook can be stapled.
That's right.
It's got,
Yeah,
you
you
can
can
print it
do
up
one-
at Kinko's, pound some staples into the middle,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
got a little thing like, I mean, I do have an example.
Do you
of
have one
that.
there? Yeah, because I remember those being something that I would make too back in the day. I remember really
Yeah,
wanting
something
to.
like this. This is a
Yep,
chapbook.
yep.
So,
And then
yeah.
when the self-printing stuff started happening, or the self-publishing stuff started coming around, that's when I got deeper into making actual, full-size books. And I'm assuming similarly for you, did you ever try and pursue like a I don't want to say like a real publisher, but like a mass publisher for poetry? And if you did, what was your experience with?
Well,
like,
my first thing was I tried to be a publisher.
my
My buddy, the guy who published my first chapbook, a guy goes Bowerbird Intelligentleman, just to acknowledge him, developed a technique for staple-bound books that looked like perfect bound books. They had a spine. You couldn't see that the staples were hidden. And so we actually started cranking books out of a laser printer and stapling them together and calling them, here we go, we're publishers now. And I published, like 4 or 5 books. The very first book I published, I later republished with a real printer, but was an anthology of surfing.
were you a surfer?
I was not a surfer.
I was gonna say, Murray. I'm definitely not a surfer.
There we go. But I was living in Southern California, and I was working with surfers, and I started seeing that there was a similarity between surfers and poets. They were both really dedicated to what they do. They basically defined their life. Surfers were surfers.
Yeah.
They may be a cook on the side or this, but
Yeah,
they were
stuff
surfers.
to make money. Yeah.
Poets were poets. And they're both really enthusiastic about what they do. And so I thought, okay, there's got to be some overlap. There have to be surfers who write poetry.
Yeah.
So I went out in search of them, and I found them. And this is the book that, like I said, this is a reprint that
Paper
we did like
shredders.
15 years later with a real publisher. But it's all poetry and short stories about surfing.
Do you have more copies of that?
Yes, I do. I have lots of copies.
Can I
of
take a copy of that?
this. Sure. I'll get you a good one out of the car.
Or just get me one like whenever,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll see you.
So that's how I got started, and
We're
I
gonna go a little
published.
longer on this, by the way. Just a little bit.
I published. I was trying to publish anthologies of poetry about topics people didn't really think of as poetry. So that was the first one. I wrote one published one of environmental poetry. I was working on one of poetry about laundromats, which there are a surprising number of poems about laundromats.
Well, back I lived in New York City, so I know I had this idea when I was living there, like, okay, I want to make a bar / laundromat where it's like a singles place. You go there to do your laundry or whatever, but you mingle there. You can have a drink while you're there or whatever. Outside of big cities, though, no one gets the idea. They're like, why would just
I had the same idea, and I don't know why people don't do that.
Yeah, I'm sure there are now,
Yeah,
especially with the whole hipster thing where they're doing stuff like that. I'm sure there's all these kind of like laundromat bar things or whatever. But I always loved that experience. As a matter of fact, I think one time I met a girl in the laundromat doing laundry. at some point. But
Yeah.
it's there's something like intimate about it and cool, and you're waiting around. You got nothing but free time, especially before cell phones.
Right.
You're just sitting around waiting.
You're just sitting around waiting to do your laundry. And if you're a poet, you're probably writing a poem about watching your wash go round and round in the dryer, you know?
So that leads me to something interesting here. Do you? So me and you both had both teenage years, like where we started becoming artists before cell phones and the internet.
Yeah.
Like I started writing in books. Same thing. I would get old typewriters, and I would love writing on a typewriter. I feel like maybe the art of poetry and that sort of thing is starting to go away a little bit because there's not this boredom time. Not necessarily boredom time, but like whenever there's a bit of downtime, okay, let me go on my phone and fill my boredom with looking at random stuff. Or am I being pessimistic by thinking that?
I think that's partially true. I definitely think that. On the other hand, you go to any open mic, and if the poets are reading off their phone,
that is true.
And I would assume a number of those were written on their phone. That I think if you're an artist, you're going to find ways to express yourself, and the way you express yourself, if you've got your phone there, that's where you're going to.
It's like Jurassic Park. Life will find a way, right? Like
right, exactly.
Poetry will find a way.
And when, like I say, when I was in high school, there was a typewriter, bang bang, and I think I haven't. Someone could do an analysis of how the way the technology you use to write influences how you write. Because I know, especially there have been like studies done for the typewriter that there are certain poets who the length of their lines was determined by the length of the line that a typewriter would produce.
Yeah.
Or, there's a guy named James Laughlin. He was actually one of my favorite poets. He was the founder of New Directions Press, which was William Carlos Williams Press, and a number of the main poets of like the 30s and 40s. And he wrote his poems on a typewriter so they lined up perfectly. The margins were perfect, and that's how he determined. The start and end always had a letter
every line
there
or whatever, a character in that place. That seems like something I would do because I'm a little obsessive compulsive. Like, it's not perfectly straight, so I'm gonna make sure it. That's interesting. Yeah, and I that definitely is true too, because when I would write with a typewriter too, you'd have to be more intentional with what you were actually putting down onto the paper.
Yes.
Because you could sort of like white it out and go back, but it never lined up properly.
Right. Yeah.
Like you want it to look nice. So I would almost think about the line I was about to type more before I typed it.
Yeah.
Than I would if I was just typing it on my phone or writing it out or whatever. Plus, autocorrect will fix stuff for you too. So you actually had to kind of know how to spell a little bit, to some extent. So you published some chapbooks, and then the self-publishing thing came around.
And then what actually happened is print on demand came out. Which is basically what my buddy and I were doing 5 years before.
Yeah.
But print on demand became a real thing. And there was a print on demand company called iUniverse, which is actually what Paper Shredders is published on in my first book, Cows on the Freeway. And they were trying to develop a market for print on demand. And you can't develop a market if you don't have product.
Sure.
They had some connection to Barnes & Noble. I was working at Barnes & Noble at the time, and they offered that they would publish a book for free to any Barnes & Noble employee that had a book to publish.
Wow.
And I was immediately like, I have a book's worth of poems. Here you go. Here's my book. And that's where Cows on the Freeway came from. Was that offer, and they're still publishing it. It's still selling.
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
Not a bestseller or anything, but that was my first published book.
It's moments like that, and people that create tend to have these often, but where you first bring something from what's in here or whatever out into the world, and then all of a sudden it's there.
Yeah.
That changes your perception of what's possible.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I can make that happen. I can bring this thing that's just in my head into the world. And the magic and the, I guess, awe I still feel whenever I'm able to do that from something, whether it be, music or I created a bar at one point, like just out of what's in here, I think is self-inspiring. And I wish more people would see that that's possible. Like the chapbooks, staple some pages together and you've made a book.
Yeah.
You've got a book now, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes people hesitate on creating their what they want because they feel, oh, that's something I can't do without a publisher or without some big company behind me or whatever.
Well, I think that's very true in music these days.
Yeah.
That you no longer need a big record company. You can put out your own CDs. You can put out your own, upload it to the online, which again, you go to an open mic, 3/4 of the musicians are like, yes, that song is now available on SoundCloud.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, everyone's putting it up there, which, I mean, there's good and bad to that.
Right,
so I need about 5 more minutes because I want to get into the tour just a little bit.
Okay.
And I want to hear some stories of the tour. So,
okay.
So let's get into that. So you've published now several books.
Right.
And this was your first tour now.
Right.
That
My first big tour.
Yeah, tour that you've gone on outside of you're just outside of your local area, let's say, right? So one, I guess, how did that come to fruition? And then what are like one or two of your favorite, I guess, performances / stories? Because I saw you post something about your car breaking down, but I will say after the fact, those are probably the best moments of a tour when things go wrong because you're like, that was the best. It was so much fun for whatever reason as an experience. So how did it come to be?
Cool. So I published the Living the Sundown book with a friend of mine owns a publishing company out in California.
Available on Amazon.com.
Yeah. And there was a big book convention in LA at the end of March. And his company had a table. Actually, they had 2 booths together because he's published a lot of books. And he's like, do you want to come out to the AWP and, read from your book and sign books and all that?
Yeah.
And I said, yes, of course I do. And then being the crazy person I am, I'm like, I'm going to drive. I don't want to fly to LA and back. I'm going to drive. I'm going to see more of the country, going to visit people. But if I'm going to do it, I want to do readings too. So I just started. I mean, I know some people who are able to set things up, and then some of them I just basically cold called. Hey, I'm coming through town. Can I do a reading?
Yeah.
And set up. In the end, it was 12. I did 12 different readings. Across the country.
And was it 12 different cities?
No, it was like 10 different cities. There were 2 places where I did 2 readings. And they were, in Ann Arbor, my brother lives in Ann Arbor, so we set one up with a bookstore there, and then he just set one up with his neighbor. It's like we went over to his neighbor's house, and I did a little mini personal reading for some of his neighbors. And the same sort of thing happened in Arizona. I did a big official reading, but I also had a little one in an art gallery that was much more intimate. And those, I liked those because, I want to, you're like, oh, there are only 5 people, but because of the topics of the book, because I'm talking about caregiving and dementia, we were able to actually get into discussions of caregiving and dementia, whereas places where I had 30, 40 people in the audience, there was no opportunity for that. It was just get up there, do my set, entertain the crowd.
Yeah.
So then they went really well.
So again, something where you had a destination and then you brought something that was out of your head. Oh, I'm going to start doing a tour. So you ended up having a book tour.
Yeah.
So one of your favorite moments from the tour, or worst moments, whichever one you want to.
Well, my favorite moment was one of the readings I did is a reading out in California that I did many times when I lived there and went to regularly. That's at this woman's house, and it's basically a poetry reading and a dinner party. They do a poetry reading in the backyard, and then she feeds everybody.
Right.
And because I'd been there so many times, and it was a small, intimate crowd. I couldn't even call it a crowd. There's only a handful of people for that one. I didn't make up a set list. I didn't plan what I was going to do. I bought a bottle of scotch because my father was a scotch drinker. I poured myself a big glass of scotch at the start, and I sat down and I talked about my parents, and I talked about taking care of them. And I read stuff out of the book, but it was mostly just like, I'm going to talk about my parents and what that experience was like. And that was very moving. So that was the highlight of a reading. I mean, that actually ranks higher in my mind than when I had 50 people in the room all loving me.
That is something to end this show on here, because I think that, again, is something that I've experienced too. Sometimes I play to one person or two people in the audience, and it's almost more intimate, or they enjoy it more than, if there were more, 50 people there, 100 people, whatever. Murray, I both admire and appreciate you.
Thank you, Patrick.
If I could call you my friend, I hope I can.
Yes, indeed.
I'm hoping at some point we can do maybe a tour together or something.
That'd be fun.
Where we can do a combination of poetry and some music, and collaborate a little bit. And I really enjoy every time we get together. Hearing some of your stories and your reading your poetry and the like. So I guess before we end here. Do we have time for him to read one, and then we'll close it out? We good with that? So maybe a short one, Murray, before Allie beats me up for taking up all our precious time here. But
Okay. Well, I will.
And
will read.
then we'll again, Amazon.com. I'll post the link on there.
Yeah.
And we'll do that. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, I'll put that little graphic down at the bottom over here somewhere. And comment. And if you want to see Murray, come out and see Murray at one of the various open mics here. I'm sure you got some readings coming up. When this will air, I don't quite know, Murray.
Okay.
But I appreciate you coming on and again being a friend, and I look forward to many, many more years of hearing your stories and trading my stories with you for them.
So. Okay. This one is called The Day.
And this is from your new book.
It is from my new book, Living the Sundown. Show that again. This is a poetic form called a pantoum, which involves repeated lines. It's an imperfect pantoum. Anyway. The day his doctor told my father he shouldn't drive anymore, there were suddenly so many errands to run. I ran into the mailbox and delivered his newspaper late. There were so many errands to run, but snow piled deep in the driveway, and the snowplow was late. The mail never came. The snow piled high against the walls. My mother argued with her caregiver and then read the same letter over and over. The turkeys ran wild in the yard. My mother argued with her caregiver because she said she didn't need a caregiver. Later, they watched the turkeys run wild and the starlings battle at the bird feeder. My mother said she didn't need her walker. My father, mystified by the remote, missed his favorite show. The bird feeder became a TV. My mother almost fell down. My father was mystified that he couldn't drive anymore. I fell asleep and drove my car into the ditch.
Well, I think that's a very apropos moment to
Yes.
end the episode. Murray, love you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Certainly.
One
Thank
more
you.
time, where can they find your stuff? So Amazon, obviously.
Amazon, gmtpoet.com.
gmtpoet.com. What's that?
We'll put the link in the bio.
Oh, yeah. We will put the link in the bio. And if you could cut one more time to hear, thank you to everyone that watches and listens. We'll have Murray on again because I do want to get deeper into your stories, and I think we have a lot more to talk about. So there'll definitely be some more content coming from Murray. Go out and get his book. On Amazon or wherever you purchase it. Go ahead and get our merch too. Help support the show. Thank you everyone for watching and listening and all that. Thank you, Allie, for producing the show and putting up with me making us late every time we do a show because I like to talk. And again, like, subscribe. See you on the next one. Say goodbye, Murray.
Goodbye, everyone.